In your headlines today, the coronavirus is now believed to have infected over 40,000 people. Sarah Montez de Oca breaks down what this is doing to the United States tech companies and how technology is being used to slow down its spread. And we bring you a new report revealing how the CIA had access to top secret and encrypted communications from over 120 countries, both enemies and allies alike. Then in your views, the first Democratic primary is underway, but one candidate is already headed for South Carolina. That story and more in today's political panel. Good afternoon. This is News Views Hughes. I'm Scotty Nell Hughes, and you're watching RT America. We start this hour with our continuing coverage of the coronavirus, how it's spreading, where it's spreading, and what it is doing to the economy. Now, several sectors are being hit hard, feeling the impact of the virus that has taken the lives of over 1,000 people, and now over 43,000 have been infected. The tech sector, where a majority of equipment comes from in China, is really also seeing an impact. So for more on this, we bring in RT correspondent Sarah Montez de Oca to break it all down. Sarah, have any of the tech companies been able to reopen?
Well, Scotty, many were scheduled to reopen this week after a one-week extension of closures following the Chinese Lunar New Year. But major tech companies had temporarily shut down, including Apple, Samsung, Microsoft, Tesla, and even Google. Most of these tech firms were scheduled to open this week, but some didn't specify when offices reopen. However, Apple is once again extending the closures, with most stores remaining closed until next week, the 14th or the 15th, they said. But this is according to Bloomberg News review of Apple's retail websites in China. Apple's statement read, "The entire Apple family is committed to helping our colleagues, communities, suppliers, partners, and customers in China," adding, "As we gradually return to work, our first priority is the well-being of our teams, supplier partners, and customers across China." Now, this could really impact Apple's losses, which could account for over $4 billion, and it could even delay the sale of up to 1 million iPhones. And that's not to mention the effect that it could have for new iPhones to be released later this year. Meanwhile, several airports are using thermal imaging equipment of fever screening systems. Now, the company typically sells only about 100 of these per year, but thousands are now being sold to deploy them at airports, railway stations, and other public gathering places. These were originally used during the SARS epidemic, where the use of cameras is able to detect the infrared energy that's visible to human eye that people and objects emit. Even drones are being used in China to track people, since requests have been made for some of them to stay indoors for 2 weeks. One man went out a little bit earlier, 12 days exactly, and he was contacted by police. Speaking on anonymity, he told Reuters, "I was a bit shocked by the ability and efficiency of the mass surveillance network. They can basically trace our movements with the AI technology and big data at any time and any place." Other cases, like the one shown on the Global Times Twitter page, shows how China is also using drones to scold its citizens without protecting their face masks, while also being used to spray disinfectant in public places. This is all in an effort to control the virus.
Using a drone to speak to residents avoids close contact between persons. It's a novel way and acceptable among residents.
Scotty, the fear of resuming production for many of these companies remains, as large numbers of people would be cramped into these factories, which could worsen the matter. And while several companies are hurting, this is only the beginning. Only time will tell how long this epidemic will last.
Well, there's obviously not a cure yet, so hopefully they will be able to continue to take steps that will contain the disease, not actually can make it spread. Thank you, Sarah, for covering.
Thank you, Scotty.
Now I want to talk more about this virus and some of the confusion around it. We turn to concierge physician Dr. Abe Malkin. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Malkin.
My pleasure.
Okay, obviously it's the headlines on most news outlets around the world right now. Should we be trusting the information being told to us regarding the coronavirus, especially the numbers that we're hearing around the world that have been infected and obviously the death numbers?
Yeah, I think the numbers that we're getting out of China may be somewhat inaccurate due to a variety of reasons, one of which is just a lack of testing equipment to properly diagnose those individuals with coronavirus. people are coming to hospitals that are understaffed with not sufficient testing kits, and they may be, treated and then led away without actually knowing if they had the coronavirus. Here in the U.S., we have abundant resources to test people for the flu and other types of viruses, so our disease figures are more accurate. That being said, the CDC and the WHO, U.S. government agencies are doing a better job of identifying the virus and its causes and giving people accurate information about how to prevent the spread.
Well, I think one of the things has been the labeling of this virus, because obviously pictures have popped up of the back of Lysol cans where it says can prevent colds, flu, coronavirus. They're going, but wait a minute, I thought the coronavirus, this was something new that's just come out these past few months. Tell me about this coronavirus, and is it sort of like the flu where there's certain strains that are obviously more detrimental, more health concerning than others?
Sure. It is a virus like the flu. So the symptoms of the coronavirus, at least at the outset, are very similar to the flu. Respiratory symptoms, cough, cold, fever, chills, body aches. The symptoms tend to onset within 2 to 14 days. And then what happens is the virus actually targets the lung tissue and causes restrictive lung disease, where it makes people more difficult to breathe, makes it have people have shortness of breath. So it starts off similar to the flu, but then progresses much more rapidly to a more serious disease, causing lung issues and difficulty breathing.
Well, and there's a lot of conspiracy theories. I think a lot of it obviously feeds on fear. It might benefit some. It obviously does not help the overall picture of it. There's these videos of people just collapsing in the streets of China and these long lines and those types of videos right there. How much stock do you put in that to actually being legitimate, or actual videos that are meant more to spread fear than actual truth about what's going on with this disease?
Sure. I mean, we've seen this now turn into somewhat of a pandemic, where people are becoming extremely concerned about the spread of the virus. Are we going to be able to contain it? And, just one image of seeing someone collapse in a street can spread fear across the country and internationally. Certainly for those who are unhealthy, elderly, or even young children, this is definitely more of a concern. For the average adult healthy individual outside of China in the U.S., it's definitely much less of a concern here. But I think for those who are living in the midst of it in China, this is definitely something that is concerning to them, for good reason. As we've seen, the mortality rate for the coronavirus is not as high as SARS. However, it is spread more quickly than in the previous SARS epidemic.
Well, and now we're finding out that, there's a cruise ship up in New York that's in harbor right now, with obviously everyone on the boat right now being in quarantine. You obviously got Army bases over in California where they're holding people who've come over. What are the chances, let's give it 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever they determine, that these residents, these people are able to go into the general public? Once they are cleared, are they officially cleared, or should there still be any concern regarding those officials? I'm worried about the pushback on people. I think there's obviously, I would even say, hate crimes that are happening against people that have come from China. Once they're cleared by a doctor, it's pretty safe to say that they're cleared as well.
That is true. Once someone is cleared, as far as we know in our understanding of the virus, they are cleared of having it. And just to put things into perspective, the coronavirus can infect people within several feet of you. It's transmitted through respiratory droplets and through human contact. Whereas SARS, for example, was slightly less infectious in that it was a smaller radius of area around you that you can infect people. However, by contrast, measles or more serious infections like that can actually be spread within hundreds of feet. So to put that into perspective, it's not nearly as infectious as measles, but it is slightly more infectious as SARS. So, in this day and age, actually, the regular flu virus is more of a concern for people in the U.S. Well,
I want to tie this back into how we started. Obviously, the lack of communication that's coming out, or the lack of trust in what we're being told as the public. Kind of reminds me of a book out of, I think it was 1981. There was a book that Dean Koontz put out. It was inspired by this. It was called The Eyes of Darkness. It was a novel. It was fake, but it talked about a corona type of virus on that side of it. These types of fear and conspiracy theories, in the present, what damage does it do? And more importantly, the next time we have one of these worldwide epidemics, what is the long-term damage that this mistrust has in those that are supposed to be providing us with truthful information?
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame that, we can't always get accurate information and rely on government agencies to provide that. China now, as compared to, a decade ago during the SARS epidemic, is a much more interconnected country. It's still somewhat behind a firewall behind their government, but it is much more connected to the rest of the world. And when things like this happen, it actually damages our ability to have good communication and reliable communication, with countries such as China, and causes a lot of mistrust amongst the population. So we're hoping that we can get this under control and repair the damage that's been done. But unfortunately, I'm sure we'll see in the future there will be a lot of mistrust when epidemics like this occur.
Well, hopefully we learned the lesson, unfortunately, because we know this is something that possibly could happen again. Thank you so much for joining us, Doctor.
You're welcome.
Well, voting is underway for the Democratic primary in New Hampshire. The latest polls have Senator Bernie Sanders in the lead, with former South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg in second. Now, meanwhile, reports are growing that former Vice President Joe Biden has already left the state and gone down south. Well, that's to South Carolina, before what may be another disappointing finish. Senator Elizabeth Warren is also campaigning across the state. Current polls have her finishing third or even fourth. Meanwhile, also going on today, 2 Roger Stone prosecutors are said to have quit after the Department of Justice said it will look to cut his prison sentence. Now, Stone was expected to be serving as long as 9 years after the Trump ally was found guilty of lying to Congress and witness tampering. So for the 360 View, we turn to our political panel. Former Georgia State lawmaker LaDon Jones and Eric Mitchell, GOP strategist. Roger Stone in the New Hampshire primary. This is 2020. I mean, let's just continue to have the interesting saga of today's politics play out for us in the headlines. So I want to start off, I don't, eeny, meeny, miny, moe. You know what, let's go with Iowa. LaDon, since that's right now the most important part, I think, because it's pressing us. Why is there so much emphasis put on Iowa and New Hampshire, especially within the Democratic Party? Because maybe just call me odd, I don't think that's a realistic synopsis of either party and a reflection on what the makeup is. Where is the diversity in these parties?
There is not a lot of diversity, at least not in these states.
Right.
And so I think that this was an automatic wake-up call for the Democratic Party. They cannot go in to the next election cycle with New Hampshire and Iowa up first without having some real good basis for it. Listen, it's the ham in the pan. They've done things the same way all the time because they thought that that's how it's supposed to be done. Hopefully this will be a lesson to them, particularly since you see cases like Biden going forward and saying, we're just going to go straight for South Carolina because he knows that he does not have much of a chance in New Hampshire.
Ah, you said my favorite ham in the pan reference. LaDon, I will always have that for you. That's right there, classic. In fact, I might even cross-stitch it on a pillow for your next Christmas present. To the Republican side, though, if Biden does so poorly in New Hampshire, as predicted, goes to South Carolina, where there is actually some more diversity within the state, however, does not do well, what does that mean for the Biden campaign? Is it truly done?
That's what I'm predicting here, Scotty. If you look at it, Biden hasn't done well in Iowa. He's clearly not doing well. I believe he's placing 4th below Warren in some of the latest results coming out of New Hampshire today. Going to South Carolina 2 weeks before Super Tuesday, you might need to start putting a fork in Mr. Biden because he's almost done. I mean, if he can't turn this around, he's the one having all the issues. Every time he goes someplace, he's insulting people, and he's losing his own direction. So it's for him, it's his to lose. And I think he'll be done by Super Tuesday.
Well, then I have to look at the fact that last night President Trump held a rally in New Hampshire. It was actually bigger than probably any of the other candidates, even though Bernie Sanders has had some pretty good crowds in New Hampshire joining for him. Should that be concerning for Democrats up north? Because obviously President Trump can bond very well with those in the South. But up north, which is where he's from, he's had some issues in the past. Even though Hampshire, he won last time 4 years ago, still was not the most popular candidate going around.
It's clear his base is there.
Oh.
Well, hold on. Let me give it to Eric, and then I'll grab you on LaDon.
I don't have the cool sayings like LaDon does, but, I'll go with it. President Trump really knows his constituents. And for the most part, I'm going to give kudos to the Democrats. Bernie and Mayor Pete, they've done a great job staying on point. The other two have lost track, and that's where President Trump is really gaining his popularity, because he can get these crowds rallied up and get behind what he's believing. While you listen to these other candidates, Warren and especially Biden, they're still focused on pointing fingers at President Trump. I mean, even Biden yesterday said the president is worried about him. That's why he'll win in November. And I'm like, you need to make it past Super Tuesday to even worry about that.
Well, but that's also what Bloomberg has been doing. He's not necessarily gone against the other candidates. He's stayed above the fray and just put his eyes focused on Trump. And he's probably the only candidate that's going up besides Buttigieg that's kind of surprising. But I've also got to talk about something else surprising, is now you have the prosecutors that are quitting on the Roger Stone case. LaDawn, what does that tell you? And you had President Trump today, really for the first time in a long time, tweet out his support of Roger Stone. Is this all because of the events of last week where he was acquitted, and now President Trump is looking at the DOJ saying, okay, help out some of my friends?
Absolutely, and we know that Donald Trump came in during his victory speech. He pointed out who were his friends, who were not. He got rid of people within his own cabinet, his own administration, very quickly around these indictments. And so people all over the place are getting a hint that Donald Trump is untouchable. He's going to get away with whatever he wants, and so probably so are all of his allies.
But that's the thing, Eric, when you look at what Roger Stone, he's actually gone through 9 years lying to Congress, I think we can all agree on both sides of the aisle, he's not the only one who's lied to Congress during this whole process and things that have been said. So did Roger get the book thrown at him too hard in the first place, and this is just trying to correct a mistake?
I think there was a big overcorrection. What Roger did, there's so many others who haven't got as harsh a sentences they want to hand down to Roger. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out, because again, his sentence was really heavy and what they've been going with. And then it's good to see them adjust. Now, I don't think he should walk scot-free, because you shouldn't lie to Congress. But I think his punishment didn't fit his crime. And I think what they're going to come out with will fit his crime.
Well, if anything, you've already got probably 2 new books that will be on the shelves in the very near future, the way the track record has gone with those resigning from anything having to do with this administration. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Scotty.
We now turn to what may be one of the Central Intelligence Agency's most far-reaching projects ever. Now get this, for decades, United States enemies and allies alike have used the company Crypto AG to help send encrypted messages within its country. Now the firm is Swiss, and it made millions of dollars selling to over 120 countries. But, and this is a huge but, according to a new report in the Washington Post, it was secretly owned by the CIA and West German intelligence. And the two agencies were able to easily get into these messages to track events such as the Iran hostage crisis and the assassination of South American leaders. So for more on this story, we dig in and bring in investigative journalist Ben Swan. Talk about a spy novel. I feel like we're actually coming out with this, and the details are becoming even more apart. We're finding out more about it. But I do have to ask, from an American standpoint, what is this genius strategy in regards to finding out what other countries were doing, especially those our adversaries? And in some situations, did this not almost have a positive effect that we had this intelligence?
Well, okay, so let's talk about the positive of it. I think there certainly, if you believe in the government apparatus that spies and says more intelligence is better, which I think most people would agree with, more intelligence, good intelligence is better. It's an interesting story of how they did this. They essentially had these machines that were built, as you said, by a Swiss company. A guy named Boris Hagelin actually created this after World War II. He created encryption machines that U.S. soldiers could actually attach to their bodies and carry around. Well, he expanded that company, and that's when West German intelligence and the CIA got involved in it. And by the 1970s and 80s, that was kind of the heyday of this. They were being used by countries all over the world, and massive amounts of intelligence were coming in. And essentially, the machines were set up in a way that would allow them to be easily deciphered by the U.S. And what's really amazing about this is most of the employees of this company did not know that the CIA was involved. They did not know there were government ties or intelligence ties, including, and this is kind of the scary part, we can talk about some of the negatives, but the salesmen who are going around the world selling this stuff. There's a story of one salesman, 51 years old, he was the #1 salesman. He was actually detained at one point in Iran. He was held, may have been tortured when he was in Iran. Eventually, Crypto AG had to pay $1 million to get him out, but what's interesting is it was the Germans who paid it, not the CIA, because they said, well, the U.S. has a policy against paying for hostages. But the guy didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know he was working for the CIA. He thought he was selling a legitimate product, and he wasn't.
Well, and so did they find out that this was obviously a CIA, that this equipment was being used to spy on them before even we, the American people, knew that we had this kind of operation going on?
No, apparently this part of what's happened here, there were times in history when certain things would happen that would tip off governments. For instance,
that they knew somebody was listening in somewhere
when
to
that
have
disco
this type
bombing
of intel.
happened from Muammar Gaddafi, remember that? And Reagan gave a speech, and he gave a lot of details in that speech about what the United States knew. Well, when that happened, the Iranians said, and the Libyans said, wait a minute. They know something, right? And so what would happen is they would look at these machines and begin to question them. The U.S. went out and recruited specific people who were experts in the field and paid them a lot of money to essentially vouch for this. And what's also interesting is there were a number of different employees, again, who didn't know this was going on, who were hired over the years to actually, they started working as engineers to fix the machines. They were finding flaws in it and say, wait a minute, this is easy to decipher. This is easy to break. And so they would either lose their jobs or they would get demoted to prevent them from being able to alter the machine. So it's a very messy story in terms of those individuals and how this kind of played out for them.
Well, and the fact that the CIA denied or said we don't pay for terrorists even or in exchange for hostages, in exchange when they were the ones that created the situation in the first place.
And put this guy into it without him knowing.
Without him knowing that side, it kind of makes you wonder. But, you know, where was this transparency in this company? You would think any sort of security firm, even if it was Swiss, where was the international community looking in at this company going, you're selling all of this, let's make sure it's legitimate?
Well, here's what's interesting. Apparently there was a big rift between the West Germans and the U.S. in terms of how this was being used, because the West Germans had a problem with the fact that the U.S. wanted to spy on everyone, whether they were allies or not. And so, you know, in 1981, their main clients were Saudi Arabia, Italy, Indonesia, Iraq, Libya, Jordan, and South Korea. But the West Germans said, wait a minute, why are we spying on, for instance, members of NATO, like Spain and Greece, Italy, and Turkey? So they were frustrated with that. What's interesting is eventually when they parted ways, the West Germans got out of this business. They were fearful in doing so that they would suddenly be spied upon. Well, we know that did happen with the NSA spying when the German Chancellor Angela Merkel had her cell phone tapped by the United States, and they were looking at that. So there was a frustration on the West German part, apparently, that the U.S. basically saw that they had no friends when it came to intelligence and that everyone was an enemy.
Well, I want to bring this to the present because right now you do have the United States accusing companies like Huawei, and you've got a company, an internet company out of Russia. You have another Kaspersky, that's talking about it. And the reason why this is happening is because we set the standard for it. So we're going, we know we do it, so therefore we're pretty much assuming you're going to do it too.
To be honest with you, I think that's the best case the United States could make against a company like Huawei or Kaspersky Labs would be to actually get up and say, we've been spying on everyone around the world for years. We know how it's done. We've been the best at it. And this is why we believe that we're being spied on. I think if they would say that and be honest, look, everyone knows that the U.S. is spying. So why not make that case?
Well, where is the outcry on this? You know, we talk about retaliation. We put tariffs. We put all of these other sort of sanctions on other countries. When we find out they do things, supposedly, you know, send memes from one country into the U.S. There's this outcry. What about outcry about setting the standard and we're doing it ourselves? We have a company with a huge building down the street with the logo right in front of it, boldly saying, we're spying on you.
You know, what's so interesting about that, and you make a great point, when we hear about Russian interference and we hear about election interference and all this talk about Facebook ads being bought and you're interfering, and we know that the U.S. was spying and manipulating these countries. And there is one other point here, and I think this is an important one. What did the United States know over the course of these many decades, and then either do or not do about political assassinations, ethnic cleansing, human rights abuses? They were aware, our intelligence community was aware of so many things happening in these countries. And in many cases, I think the question has to be asked, what did they allow to continue to happen? Because they wanted to protect the fact that they were able to spy. And when you do that, then you have to ask the question, well, what is spying worth anyways? If you're going to allow genocides to take place, if you're going to allow human rights abuses to take place, and you're going to ignore all of that just for the sake of having information, then maybe spying isn't really worth it anyways.
And then the question has to be asked, if they can do this to our adversaries, those on the outside, are they willing to do it to our own citizens? And I think that is the real answer to that. I think that's the real discovery. And I think it's naive to think that this isn't still going on, maybe just under another type of program.
In a more high-tech way,
Exactly. Thank you, Ben, for covering this, and thank you for continuing to shed light on stories like this.
Scotty, thanks.
London's Metropolitan Police have been facing a backlash since announcing plans to use live facial recognition cameras and is creating a new wave of interest in makeup called dazzle camouflage. Well, RT's Shadia Edwards-Dashti has the story from the UK.
Makeup. I certainly rely on it on a daily basis, but I don't think I rely on it as much as these guys. This is the Dazzle Club, and no, they're not off to a rave, but they're standing up to surveillance. What they're doing is using anti-facial recognition makeup to defy the system, taking defiance to a whole new level. Looks like an artwork Picasso would be proud of himself. Well, there's an estimated 630,000 CCTV cameras watching London's 8 million people go about their daily lives. That's around one camera for 14 people. The sophisticated algorithms can already extract information ranging from gender, age, and even mood from a single image. And then those physical attributes can be linked to commercial or government databases. And while the facial recognition technology can provide huge benefits in automation and security, many would argue it's a threat to privacy. Despite the arguments against, though, advances in facial recognition are moving police surveillance into a new Orwellian phase.
The Dazzle Club started as a response to Sadiq Khan's letter about facial recognition being used on the Argent King's Cross site. And we've spent a lot of time around King's Cross and CSM.
People walk with us and we don't say, oh, there's a camera. But at the end of the walk, they're like, oh, there's cameras everywhere.
The group meets once a month to walk through different parts of London, masked with their camouflage that prevents computers recognising their faces. Well, the trick to dazzling, as they call it, is to break up the face. And, as the motto goes, less is more when it comes to the beauty routine. So, let's explore the secret of deceiving Big Brother. Time to get ready for a walk. Police say facial recognition will revolutionise the fight against crime, and with the threat of terror on the rise, the pressure for improved security heightens. But surely a simple lick of paint can't stop this cutting-edge technology, can it?
It's expecting your lips to be here, so it could be that actually, you know, your lipstick goes all the way this way, and you're kind of then obscuring that in a different way.
It's been primarily tested on white men. When it's kind of implemented on a kind of mass level on the streets of London, for example, it is largely inaccurate when it comes to people of colour.
But while makeup like this presents a challenge to facial recognition, it can still be beaten by other technologies, like gait recognition, meaning people's distinctive walking patterns are also monitored. So perhaps the trick to dodging the system is more of a hop, skip and jump away too. Do you think it's an invasion of human rights, or do you think...
Yeah, I think we have a right
to... The level of surveillance, do you think it's against our human rights?
Yeah, and we have a right to understanding where our data is going and how it's being used.
I don't personally feel safer when I'm surrounded by cameras. At the moment, there is a very big, widely acknowledged grey area of legislation, so all of this data is being collected.
But whether the Dazzle Club are a small step or leap away from bowing down to Big Brother, they're certainly spoiling the snoopers snooping. Shadia Edwards-Dashti, RT, London.
You know, to be dazzling, I would have thought there'd been more glitter involved in that makeup, but hey, you know what do I know? It's because that's the news this hour. I know a lot after the last 30 minutes. I want you to follow me on Twitter at ScottyNHughes, where I share a lot of my wisdom. Use the hashtag TeamNBH. We'll see you right back here at 3 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for questioning more.